Thank you, Gary. And it's nice to see that when we talked about the Agile sourcing working group, taking a look at different practices and a common framework. Well, as they say, great minds think alike. There's another side to that, but it's not relevant, which is fools seldom differ. But we won't talk about that. Anyway, but yeah, I think advisory firms such as NEO that I represent and ISG and others have evolved independently, of course, something that is now more or less becoming an industry standard. And I think the standards library in GSA can benefit from an abstract that is a common framework, really, a standard framework. So moving on, panel discussion. And it was nice to see, Gary, your slide on the AI impact on your Tango. And I had a couple of slides as well from moving on from the chat GPT question, the answer to the question that I raised. And perhaps we could, Shivani, is there a way we can get those two slides, the hidden slides? Okay, so meanwhile, we've been talking for a while, so I'm sure people have had questions on their mind. So let me just throw it open to the audience to see if anyone has a question or a comment to any of us on.
Yes, I'm really interested in the collaboration aspect of Agile sourcing as well.
Yeah, share.
Yeah.
So yeah, just saying, I'm really interested in the collaboration aspect of Agile sourcing. How does it feel getting competitors in a room together? Are there challenges with that when you're trying to work towards a solution? I can imagine sometimes like stony silence.
Yeah, probably maybe I need to clarify that normally the providers are not in the same room. They may be in the same office in a different room, but not normally in the same room. So that has happened though, but it's quite rare. But that's where it's more around a sort of a group that work together for a common solution rather than selecting a particular provider. So no, it would be in separate.
Yeah, I believe it's called the big room approach to Agile sourcing, right? That there's a flavor of that floating around. I think some advisory firm does it. We don't do that in NEO at all. We avoid it as much as possible. We don't see any advantage. There are several disadvantages to that because providers being what they are, their sales, instinct takes over and they try to show off, and the tendency to go off course and kind of talk about bright, shiny things that are not relevant to the topic, that becomes amplified. The same risk that Gary talked about earlier in his deck. So we try to have these sessions in, conceptually speaking, in different rooms, as Gary pointed out, if not in the physical building, but at least at different points in time. But the key element is the cross-pollination between all these discussions. Taking some ideas from here, and Gary referred to it as well. So some service providers may drop out of the whole process because they got down selected, but their ideas, some of their ideas could potentially be brought into the discussion and may help shape the final solution. That's a possibility, and providers are aware of that, and that's how the game is played.
There's a couple of thoughts. I have seen it where a number of suppliers have been brought in to be briefed. So there's the idea that you get, these are fairly long list, and you bring them all in. This is what we're looking to do, and you're not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but it just provides them with an understanding of what the opportunity actually looks like. There's another thought as well about the big room being done within the context of the public sector, where the notion of everybody getting exactly the same information is considered to be particularly crucial. And so being able to demonstrate that you brought everybody in and told them exactly the same story, there's no doubt about that. If you're in the public sector, and Gary, you would be that'd be you, it might be something that's actually quite useful. Having said all of that, I absolutely agree with Gary and Hammond that there's some real challenges in trying to get the suppliers to kind of play nicely together.
Sure, go ahead. Do you need a mic?
Oh, no, that's fine. Thanks. Great session. How do you balance the art of the possible or innovation with the client's budget constraints, and especially with different client stakeholders wanting different things?
That's where the need for a facilitator is very important. You need, it's like the conductor of an orchestra. Everybody might be very good at their own pieces, the violin, the piano, what have you, but if the conductor is missing, there could potentially be noise instead of music. So very similar metaphor applies here as well. You need which is why you need to hire ISG or Neo Group.
Yes.
Thank you for allowing me to segue into it. Or SIA as well. But yeah, it needs a strong facilitator to stay the course and not veer off into many different directions, because that tendency is always there. Like I said, large reason why Agile is popular today is because of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And all clients face it. They don't know what they don't know, and they're likely to grab the first shiny thing they see. So there has to be a certain discipline to the whole process.
I have to say, I have seen agile sourcing working best with advisors rather than
Yes.
external procurement functions. So I take your point.
Yes.
Just
When can we meet after this?
just to follow on to that question as well, I would say that the initial workshop, which we call the outcome scope, so the positive outcome session, is where we run a brainstorming with all the key stakeholders, and those stakeholders have an opportunity to say what they're looking for. And it often you end up with completely disparate ideas and opinions, but we bring all that together in a sort of a 2-hour session normally. And at the end of it, you've got a set of sort of 5 or 6 positive outcomes that they have all aligned to. And what we say is, these are the outcomes that we are going into this process with. And everyone has to walk out the room having bought into that. So that's basically the elevator pitch. So that's what we always come back to, is those outcomes. So your question, if something is shiny and new and it looks great, the art of the possible, does that help us meet the outcomes? And that's the first question to ask.
Thanks.
Ask about I think it was your shot. It was initial slides around the kind of the waterfall being quite a linear, defined process versus sort of the more circular approach. I think when I saw the case study, it still felt to me like it was quite linear and structured. So I wondered if you could give an example where it actually follows more of that circular, iterative process as opposed to it being a different waterfall method, essentially.
Yeah. Well, even the circular process is actually a line, isn't it? So if you actually look at the way things move forward, there is look at this one. This is actually
each bolt down a bit.
Yeah. So if you look at the collaborative solutioning workshops, that's where the circularity comes in. Yeah. Otherwise, it is a line. The big thing is that's where the value gets created. The rest of it is fairly, procedural, I want to say, but the real envisioning and innovative, creative stuff happens in those. The requirement definition is internal, based on I liked Gary's metaphor of speed dating. So that's you do that, and then you down select down to a smaller number of players, and then define your requirements, and then go into collaborative solutioning. So that part, you're right, it is linear, but there is a circularity that steps in. So that's where the iterations are.
Gary, you talked about who should be in the room from a customer perspective, stakeholder perspective, but who from a service provider typically expect to be there, because that's probably quite critical in terms of their ability to make decisions, come up with ideas, come up with solutions, think outside of the norm in terms of how you deliver something.
That's a great question, thanks. Yeah, my answer to that is very simple. From a provider perspective, normally in these workshops, I gave an example where we had 20, but that's, to be honest, is sort of too many to really be effective. In that situation, you would have that number because you've got breakouts with different specialist SMEs coming in. But typically, if you're talking about maybe 10 people on the provider team, mostly delivery people. So you'd have your sponsor, someone who is the decision maker, who is responsible for that service line or that geo, and can make those decisions. But they're pretty much in the background. And they may do the initial sort of pitch, it's who we are, how great we are, and then they step back. You have a bid lead. The bid lead's role is to orchestrate and to make sure everything runs smoothly, and they're the interface to the client. Sometimes they may have a solution architect who might take on that role, and that's fine. But everybody else really needs to be on the delivery side. So we say to the providers, we say it every single time, bring your delivery people. And we don't just mean people who are up here responsible for delivery of, the minions. It is people who are actually at that sharp end, who have been there and done it and can talk. They can talk one-to-one with the client about, yes, this is how we deal with these security vulnerabilities. And they can talk, expert to expert. And as we go through that process, we get into the solutioning and then the co-solutioning. We find it's like, it should be 90% delivery. Of course, if you've got something like a people transfer, then you'd have somebody from HR as an expert in that. You had finance there from a commercial point of view. But generally, it's the delivery people. I would say sort of 2/3 of the room at least needs to be delivery.
Yeah, so that's one major difference between the traditional approach and the agile approach, other than the linear circular whole business, which is essentially traditionally you had procurement on the buy side and you had sales on the sell side. The key players in both organizations on both sides were basically these two functions. But in agile, it's kind of turned on its head. It's basically the clients, it's customer centric. It's based on, think of the product owner on the client side and those who are going to actually solve those issues and provide the solution on the sell side. So they drive the solutioning process. And then, of course, procurement can step in, and then, the salespeople can say somebody has got to do that piece also. But that's relegated to the background compared to Chris. Do you want to?
Yeah, because I think when we look through the slides, we can see that this process, particularly for a highly complex IT outsourcing, is really quite complex. So there's a number of events that would take place. And one of the advantages of that, I think, is that you can zero in on certain aspects of the bid overall. And you need to ensure that the right people are in the room, depending upon what it is that you're actually exploring in that one moment. So you might well have workshops that are very much focused around the delivery. So you'd have those delivery stroke operational people, but you might have other workshops which are very much more focused down on commercials, where you perhaps don't want the delivery guys to be sitting there just feeling a bit bored in the background. You want the people who are going to be doing the deal. So you need to, and again, this is where the facilitation comes in. You need to have somebody who understands how to structure all of this so that you've got the right people at the right time to make sure that everybody's time is used to the best effect.
No passengers is what we say. If you're there in the room, you're there for a reason because you're going to speak. If you're not there, if you're not speaking, then why are you there?
And I think we have to also always remember that from the buy side, this is a huge commitment of time. And it can be a real challenge to the process because you've got to have so many people giving up so much time. What you really don't want is somebody coming along to a workshop and at the end of it thinking, well, I don't know why I was there. I've just wasted half a day of my time. And that sets them against the process overall. From the supplier side, of course, it is a huge investment of time and resource. Right. And you don't really want to be dragging people into these workshops that really don't have anything to say. So there's a pragmatic side. Is it pragmatism or expediency? Probably both that you need to take into account.
Can invent a portmanteau word with both pragmatic and expedient. Yeah, we'll come up with something. We'll work that out. We're consultants. I see two questions at the back there.
So you want to go first? Yeah, two questions. As of today, what % of sourcing deals do you see following agile sourcing method? And two, how do you prepare service providers to adapt to agile sourcing?
Okay, great questions. So for the first one, I think in Neo's case, we've ended up doing work for clients for whom Agile is a better alternative. I can't speak for the industry as a whole, but for us, it's almost all of them are Agile sourcing candidates. And we explain the idea to the client and get their buy-in before going down that path. I mean, their procurement team has to agree, right? And everybody else, like I said, executive sponsorship is key. So if we don't get that, then we have to do it the traditional way. But so far, at least in the last few years that we've been doing this, it's generally been Agile. So in our case, it's 100%, but that's not necessarily representative of the industry. And I'd let Gary speak to it as well. And what is the second question that you had?
How do you prepare the service providers to adapt to?
Okay, by now, all the top tier ones, they know what this is. So they know it. They've actually been invited for RFPs run by ISG, by Neo, by Avasant, by name a few others. I don't know who else is there in the industry doing this kind of work. So they're aware of it. The top tier 1, tier 2 providers aren't. The ones who aren't so we do have a kind of initial session with them, take them through what we are going to be doing and how we're going to be doing it, and make sure that they're educated and their teams are willing to invest. And that was key, that point that Chris made on both sides. We've got to get the people who are actually going to do the work. So in that sense, everybody has day jobs. So getting technical people together in a room is difficult. So that's a more important aspect rather than just the supplier saying, yeah, we'll do this, no problem. Then getting all the salespeople in.
I think I'll let Gary talk to the numbers. I'm sure that ISG have done work around this. My sense of it is that whilst agile sourcing is clearly something that that has captured people's imagination, there's a number of people that have an understanding of it and really are very keen to promote it within the buy side organisations. I think there's also an awful lot of people who really do feel very comfortable with the RFP waterfall type process. And I think that there's a lot of organisations still who, all things being equal, would just default to the RFP process. I think the procurement sort of profession, sort of overall, would still see the RFP process as being, the standard approach, the default approach. And agile sourcing has its applications, but so we've often had to have conversations with our buyers to explain to them the benefits of going down a different route. But I'm interested to see what Gary's thoughts are in terms of.
Yeah, I just think about that. I mean, in terms of numbers, I would say in the private sector, it's in excess of 90% because it's the ISG default model for the last 10 at least years that I've been there. So yes, occasionally we will be asked to follow a standard, more traditional sort of asynchronous process, if you like, rather than the agile one. But generally, it is agile. However, I think Jem's point you made earlier about the sort of actually is it just a waterfall process dressed up as agile in a way? In many cases, with large enterprises who have a process, and we're coming in maybe on the first engagement with them, we will adopt the process that they have. We will adopt and adapt. So we will start with, and we'll use the language that they're familiar with. But what we will do more often than not is inject some agility into that process. So like you were saying, Herman, within the sort of solutioning, we'll say, why don't we do this through workshops or whatever? And more often than not, the client is open to that. And by the end of it, they're absolutely sold on it. And that's the way they want to go. So my experience is a very positive one. Numbers, I think, in excess of 90%. How do we prepare the service providers? We run training sessions from time to time to coach them in the model, but then also briefing. I make sure that all of the service providers are prepared for the process and say, this is the process we're adopting. If you're not familiar with the Agile Future Source, why not? But this is the process, and this is how it's being adapted for this particular client. These are the timescales, and these are the this is what you have to do. So there's always some tweaks, some nuances on each deal. So briefing the service provider with the client, of course, is really critical for that.
Great. I think we have one more question. We'll probably take a quick answer.
Yeah, I think it's quite a quick question. So I'm a service provider and I'm in a process right now with an existing client. And thank you for your presentation, because I might have had a light bulb moment. Either they don't want to do an RFP. There's a lot of similar elements to what you've described as sort of the objectives, if you like, loosely speaking. And either they're reinventing the wheel, they're trying to invent their own process, but they're not, because those best practices aren't there, or they're trying to follow this process, but there's not a lot of knowledge. They probably need your help, to be honest.
Sure.
My
question, names and addresses.
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk to you more later about that. But my question is, as a service provider and a member of GSA, is there a agile sourcing best practice that I can kind of suggest to them very diplomatically and in a very—
We are working towards the working group. The objective of the working group is to do exactly that. So it should be in the library soon.
Okay, great. Brilliant.
Thank you. And I think Chris, sorry, you wanted to add something, Gary?
I actually wanted to ask a question, actually, if I may, a question to the room. Which I show of hands from buyers, clients, who's actually used agile sourcing in their sourcing transactions? And by contrast, how many have not? So it's a bit sort of even. Okay.
Got a question online there, Amanda.
Sorry?
We're hybrid, so that question popped up very quickly online.
I was just putting my hand up to say that we have done agile sourcing actually online.
Yeah, got to remember online. Okay, thank you.